The great alien court was louder than a storm, but in the very center of that huge place, a young dragon stood in chains, shaking like a leaf in cold wind. The dragon's scales were a soft silver color, but dust and dirt covered them. And the chains around its wings and legs were tight. Far too tight for a young creature. Every eye in the court was staring at the dragon. But not with kindness. Most looked with fear, some with anger, and a few with cruel enjoyment. No one tried to comfort the dragon. And no one asked why it trembled so much. The dragon could not speak. Or maybe it simply did not dare to speak. Whenever it opened its mouth even a little, the noble who held the whip stepped forward and raised his arm as if ready to strike again. The noble was tall, with sharp eyes and a cold smile. He enjoyed the court's attention. He enjoyed the silence before a hit. He enjoyed the power he had over the small dragon. See? He shouted to the crowd. The beast refuses to answer. It refuses to obey. The crowd murmured loudly. Some nodded, believing him. Others looked confused, wondering how a child, even a dragon child, could be expected to stay calm under pain and fear. The dragon lowered its head again. Its breath shook. Its wings twitched, but it made no sound. It stood still because any movement made the whip crack in the air like lightning. The noble liked that sound, and every time he cracked the whip, the dragon's whole body jumped as if struck by thunder. The judge, an old creature with golden horns, cleared his throat and asked the same question he had asked many times. Why did you fail your first flight trial? It was a question a young dragon should answer with pride or excitement. But the dragon only closed its eyes tightly, unable to speak, unable to defend itself, unable to even cry for help. It felt alone. Small, weak, and trapped, the court whispered again. Some called the dragon broken, some called it dangerous. Some said it should be punished, because a dragon that cannot follow orders is a threat. No one talked about kindness, no one talked about fear. And no one asked what the dragon had been through before it arrived here. They had already decided it was guilty simply because it could not speak. Then a strange rumor spread through the crowd like a spark racing across dry grass. Someone said a human was outside the court doors. Someone else said the human demanded to enter. Others laughed, wondering why a human would come to a dragon trial. Humans were rare here, and they were usually quiet, careful, and never involved in alien court matters. But this rumor did not sound like a normal visitor. Some said the human looked angry. Others said he looked calm but dangerous, like a volcano before an eruption. A few even whispered that he had come because he knew the dragon, though no one believed that at first, while the crowd argued and whispered. The dragon lifted its head a little. It felt something different in the air. A faint scent, a familiar warmth, a memory from a better time. It did not understand why or how, but for a moment, the fear in its chest loosened, just a little. The large doors of the court suddenly opened with a deep echo that silenced everyone. The guards stepped aside, confused and tense. And then the human walked in, slowly, quietly, but with a heavy presence that filled the whole room. He wore simple clothes, but his face showed a kind of strength that did not come from muscles. It came from something deeper, something unbreakable. His eyes scanned the court, then froze when he saw the small dragon in chains. The noble with the whip stepped back without meaning to. The judge blinked in surprise. The crowd forgot to breathe. And the dragon, still trembling, stared at the human with wide, hopeful eyes. No one spoke, because in that moment, everyone felt it. The story was about to change, completely and forever. The human who entered the alien court was named Daniel Hayes. But almost no one in that chamber knew his name yet. They only felt something unusual about him, something steady and powerful, like the calm before a great storm. Daniel did not walk fast, but every step he took carried weight. The guards who tried to approach him slowed down, unsure why they suddenly felt nervous. He did not look at them. His eyes were fixed only on the small chained dragon in the center of the court. For weeks, Daniel had searched across stations, ports, hidden tunnels, lonely moons, and dangerous black markets. He had not slept well. He had barely eaten. He had followed every rumor of a small silver dragon being captured or sold or injured. He had held on to one hope, that his child was still alive. And now, after so much pain and fear, he finally saw them. "Ember," he whispered. The young dragon flinched at the soft sound, not in fear of him, but because it recognized him. It had been so long since Ember had heard a safe voice, a voice filled with warmth instead of commands or threats. Ember raised its head slowly, like someone waking from a long nightmare. Their eyes met, and Daniel felt something tighten painfully in his chest. His child was covered in dust. Their scales were bruised. Their wings trembled so hard they could barely stay open. And worst of all, Ember's expression was one he had never seen on them before, pure fear. The court watched silently as Daniel walked closer. Many had seen humans before, but none had seen one like this. Calm, steady, but holding an anger so deep it made the air feel heavier. The judge shifted uncomfortably on his high seat. The noble with the whip tried to stand taller, but his hand twitched nervously. Daniel stopped only a few steps away from the chained dragon. He looked at the chains first, then at Ember's shaking wings, then at the marks on their back. His breath grew slow and cold. He lifted his head and looked straight at the noble who held the whip. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the court like a blade slicing through air. "Who," Daniel asked, "did this to my kid?" A wave of shock rippled through the chamber. Many gasped. Some whispered in confusion. Others stared in disbelief. A human calling a dragon kid? Impossible, they thought. Humans adopted pets, maybe. But a dragon child? Unheard of. The noble recovered first. He forced a smile, though it looked weak. "This creature belongs to no one," the noble said loudly. "It is wild, dangerous, disobedient, and it failed the first flight trial. Punishment is tradition." Daniel stared at him without blinking. The noble's smile faltered. The judge tried to calm the room. "Human, you cannot interrupt a court trial. This dragon stands accused of what?" Daniel cut in quietly. "Being scared?" Some members of the court shifted in their seats. They had not expected the human to speak with such certainty, such fire. The noble pointed the whip at Ember. "The beast refuses to speak, refuses to fly, refuses to follow simple orders. It is defective." Ember flinched again. Daniel looked down at his child gently. "Ember," he said softly, "did they hurt you every time you tried to speak?" The dragon's eyes filled with water. Their throat tightened, but they nodded once, very slowly. Gasps filled the court. The noble grew pale. Daniel turned back toward the crowd. "You tortured a frightened child," he said. His voice did not rise. It did not shake. But every creature in the room felt something cold settle into their bones. Some in the crowd began whispering. Some looked down in shame. Others stared at the noble with suspicion now. The noble took a step back. "Humans do not decide our laws," he said, voice breaking slightly. Daniel stepped forward just enough for the noble to feel trapped. "Good," he answered calmly. "Because if I did, you would not be holding that whip right now." The room fell silent. And for the first time since the trial began, Ember felt the smallest spark of hope. Their dad was here, and everything was about to change. The court had never been this quiet. Not even during major trials, not even during political arguments, not even when kings had been judged. The silence now came from something different. A human father standing in the center of an alien court, refusing to look away from the truth in front of him. Daniel Hayes kept one hand slightly lifted, as if shielding Ember from even the air around them. The young dragon stayed close to him, Shaking less now that he stood between them and the noble who liked to use the whip, the judge cleared his throat again, trying to regain control. "Human Daniel," he said slowly, "you do not understand the customs of this planet." Daniel didn't look at him. His eyes remained locked on the noble. The noble swallowed hard. "Explain," Daniel said softly, "why you believed it was acceptable to hurt a child who was already afraid." The noble lifted his chin as if trying to look proud. "The dragon refused its first flight trial. It refused to speak. It refused to follow any command. It is our way to correct creatures that do not follow rules." Daniel stepped slightly forward. The noble stepped slightly back. "It refused," Daniel said, "because it was scared." Gasps and murmurs filled the chamber again. Many members of the court looked at each other, unsure what to believe anymore. The noble's face tightened in frustration. "This creature," he said sharply, "has no voice, no discipline, and no respect." Daniel finally looked at the judge. "Is that what they told you too? That my child is defective?" The judge hesitated. That hesitation was enough to make the whole crowd uncomfortable. Slowly he nodded. "The reports we received said the dragon could not speak, that it would not answer any question, that it would not follow any instruction from the trainers." Daniel let out a slow breath. "So you punished a child for being silent in fear. Did any of you ever ask why?" Silence again. Flaming silence. Heavy silence. Daniel knelt beside Ember. Placing a gentle hand on their neck, Ember leaned into the touch, like someone who had been freezing for weeks, but finally felt the warmth of home. The dragon's tail curled around their father's leg, seeking safety. "Ember," Daniel said softly, "it's okay now. You don't have to speak if you don't want to. But I need to ask you something." Ember looked up with wide, shiny eyes. "Did these people hurt you when you tried?" Ember lowered their head and slowly nodded. The crowd's reaction was instant. Shocked gasps, angry whispers, a few shouts of disbelief. Even the judge's eyes widened. Daniel rose again, his face calm but terrifying in its calmness. "So the court was given false information," he said. Ember was not refusing to speak. Ember was too scared to speak. The noble threw out his arm in frustration. "Lies," he shouted. "The beast simply disobeys. Dragons must be broken when they resist." That word, broken, made Ember flinch so violently that Daniel's expression changed. A cold, hard anger filled his eyes, but he kept his voice low. "You cannot break something that is alive," Daniel said. "You can only hurt it." Several members of the court nodded slowly, understanding at last. The noble saw their reactions and panicked. "You listen to a human over tradition?" He yelled. "This man has no authority here." Daniel walked toward him. Every step he took made the noble shrink. "I don't need authority," Daniel said quietly. "I have the truth, and I have my child." Members of the court leaned forward. Even the guards seemed unsure what to do. Daniel continued, "If you wanted Ember to trust you, to fly for you, to speak for you, you should have treated them with kindness. Dragons do not learn through fear. They learn through bonds." The judge looked down at the papers on his desk. Reports written by trainers who had never earned the dragon's trust. Reports full of exaggerations or lies. He felt the weight of guilt. Perhaps for the first time, he wondered how many other dragons had suffered the same treatment. The noble tried one last time to regain control. "Human, dragons belong to." Daniel raised his hand, silencing him without a word. "No, Ember belongs with me. And the more you speak, the more this court sees the truth." The crowd murmured again. The noble turned pale. And Ember, standing just behind Daniel's leg, felt a new emotion spreading slowly inside them: safety. For the first time since they were taken, they believed the nightmare might actually end. The noble with the whip tried to stand tall, but the fear in his eyes was clear now. Daniel had not raised his voice, had not made a single threat, yet every Creature in the court felt that something heavy and dangerous had entered the room with him. It was not violence, it was truth. And truth often frightened the guilty more than any sword. Daniel turned slowly to face the noble fully. "Your name," he said calmly. "Tell it." The noble hesitated. He was used to shouting orders, not being questioned. "I am Lord Vereen," he said finally, lifting his chin in a shaky attempt to look proud. Daniel nodded once. "Lord Vereen," he repeated. "You enjoy hurting those who cannot fight back, don't you?" Varyn's face twisted in anger. "I follow tradition. Dragons who fail must be corrected." "By whipping them?" Daniel asked. His voice was soft, but each word struck like a hammer. The noble's mouth opened, but no answer came out. Daniel stepped toward the center of the room. "I searched many worlds for Ember," he said, addressing not the noble, but the judge, the guards, and the entire audience. "During my search, I collected information. People talk when they see something wrong. Workers whisper, traitors share stories. And do you know what story I heard again and again?" The crowd leaned forward. Even the judge's golden horns trembled slightly. "I heard that dragons trained under Lord Vereen often come back injured," Daniel said. "I heard they return quieter, more fearful. Some never speak again, some never fly again. Some disappear." A ripple of fear and discomfort moved through the crowd. The noble raised the whip as if to defend himself. "Lies! People spread rumors because they are jealous of my skill." Daniel looked at the whip. The leather was darkened with old marks, stains that were not from dust or age. "Skill," Daniel said quietly, "should not leave scars." The noble lowered the whip slowly, realizing the entire court was staring at him with suspicion, not respect. Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. With a tap, it projected a hologram into the air, grainy but clear. Enough to show a frightened dragon trying to fly while a trainer shouted and cracked a whip behind it. The dragon fell hard. No one went to help it. The trainer laughed. Gasps exploded around the court. Daniel tapped again. Another hologram appeared, showing a young dragon refusing food because a trainer kept hitting its tail whenever it reached for the bowl. Another tap. A dragon locked in a dark cage, shaking uncontrollably. Another tap. A dragon screaming as the whip struck its back. All the recordings had one thing in common. The trainer in every one of them was Lord Vereen. Vereen turned pale. You invaded restricted areas." "These recordings are stolen." Daniel shook his head. "They were given to me by workers who could not watch your cruelty anymore." The judge stared at Vereen with widening eyes. "Lord Vereen, is this true?" Vereen backed away. "A tradition says these beasts must be controlled." "Beasts?" Daniel repeated, his voice suddenly sharp. "Is that what you see when you look at a child?" Ember pressed closer to Daniel's leg. Their wings folded tightly against their body. They remembered those same dark places, those same shouts, those same hits. Their small body trembled as the memories hit them again. Daniel noticed and gently rested a hand over Ember's head. "You're safe," he whispered. "You're not going back to him." The crowd began to murmur loudly now, not in confusion this time, but in anger. Anger not at Daniel, but at Vereen. Some stood, some shouted. Some demanded the noble be punished. The judge raised his hand for silence, but his voice shook when he spoke. "Lord Vereen, this evidence is serious, very serious." "I did not know." "That's the problem," Daniel said. "No one knew. No one looked. No one listened." He knelt beside Ember again. "But I listened. And I believed my child when they were scared." Vereen tried to speak but could not form the words. The whip slipped from his hand and fell to the floor. The sound of it hitting the ground echoed through the entire chamber. And in that moment, every creature in the court understood one thing. With painful clarity, Lord Vereen's authority was crumbling. And Daniel Hayes, a simple human father, had done what no one else had dared. The court was filled with shocked whispers. But all the noise faded when Ember slowly lifted their head. Until this moment, they had been hiding behind Daniel, trying to make their bodies smaller, as if they wished they could disappear. But something inside them shifted. Maybe it was the sound of the whip hitting the floor. Maybe it was Daniel's hand resting gently on their head. Maybe it was the knowledge that someone finally believed them. Ember's small claws scraped the floor as they stepped slightly forward. Their wings trembled, but they did not fold them completely this time. For the first time since being captured, Ember felt like they might not need to hide. Daniel looked at them, his eyes softening. "You don't have to do anything," he whispered. "But if you want to try, I'm here." Ember stared at him. They remembered warm nights back home, learning little words, trying to speak for the first time, practicing sounds with Daniel by their side. They remembered laughter, comfort, gentle touches on their wings. They remembered a world before fear. The judge leaned forward, confused. "The dragon responds to you?" Daniel nodded. "Of course. Ember only speaks to people they trust. They've always been shy with strangers." Ember swallowed hard. Their throat felt tight. Speaking in this huge court full of staring eyes seemed impossible. But Daniel was here. Daniel was safe. Daniel was home. The crowd watched in silence as Ember opened their mouth just a little. A soft sound escaped, nothing like a word, nothing clear, just a tiny, shaky breath that carried more emotion than speech. Gasps filled the room. Even that small noise felt like a miracle after weeks of silence. "You see?" Daniel said gently. "They're trying." The judge blinked in surprise. "So, the dragon is not mute?" "No," Daniel said, shaking his head. "Ember is scared, hurt, traumatized, and children who are scared don't talk, human or dragon." Lord Varen's face turned bright red. "This means nothing," he said loudly. One sound does not prove, but Ember wasn't done. They closed their eyes, focusing on the safe warmth of Daniel's presence. Their tail twitched nervously, their wings shook harder. The memory of being whipped flashed through their mind, and they almost stopped. But then Daniel placed both hands on the sides of their neck, grounding them. "I'm here," he whispered. "You're okay." Ember took another deep breath, and this time, a word formed that it was broken, soft, fragile, but it was real. "Dad." The word echoed across the chamber as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. It wasn't loud. It wasn't perfect. But it hit the room harder than any roar. Daniel froze for a second, not in fear, but in overwhelming love. A smile tugged at his lips, the first real smile he had shown since entering the court. "Hey, Ember," he whispered, voice suddenly thick with emotion. "I'm here." The judge nearly fell out of his seat. The guards stared with wide eyes. The crowd erupted in gasps and whispers again, louder than ever before. Some of them cried. Some clasped their hands in shock. Some covered their mouths. A few even bowed their heads in shame. Because now no one could deny the truth. The dragon was not a wild creature. The dragon was not broken. The dragon was not dangerous. The dragon was a child calling out to their parent, Lord. Varen stumbled backward as if the single word had struck him physically. His whole argument, his whole defense, shattered in an instant. No tradition could excuse hurting a child who could speak a word so full of love. "This is impossible," Varen whispered. "Dragons do not bond with humans like this." Daniel turned to him slowly. "Maybe not with you," he said, "because you see them as beasts. I see them as family." A hush fell again. This hush felt different, heavy with realization, heavy with guilt, heavy with truth. Ember moved closer and pressed their forehead to Daniel's stomach, seeking comfort. Daniel stroked their back gently, protecting them from every gaze in the room. The judge finally spoke, his voice unsteady. I did not know. We were misled." Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was already spreading through the chamber like light breaking through cracks in a dark wall. And Ember, small and trembling, had spoken their first word in weeks, not because they were commanded to, not because they were forced, but because someone they loved stood beside them. That single word had changed everything. The word Ember spoke still hung in the air like warm light. Dad, so small, so soft, but powerful enough to shake the entire court. It was as if the whole chamber had stopped breathing at the same time. Even the walls seemed to lean closer, listening. Daniel kept his hand on Ember, steady and reassuring, while the crowd struggled to understand what they had just witnessed. The judge wiped his eyes, pretending it was dust. This changes everything, he murmured. No one could deny it anymore. Ember was not a wild creature. Ember was not refusing orders out of stubbornness. Ember was a child seeking safety, and Daniel was the one person who gave it. But Lord Vereen refused to surrender. His face twisted in anger as he tried to save his collapsing authority. This is manipulation, he shouted. The dragon only spoke because the human is forcing. Daniel turned his head in Varen's direction, slow and silent. The moment their eyes met, Vereen froze. Daniel did not raise his voice. He did not move toward him. He simply looked. But that look held a cold fire, a warning sharper than any blade. It was not the stare of a warrior. It was the stare of a father who had seen his child suffer and would not allow one more second of harm. The entire chamber felt it. A shiver ran through the crowd. Even the guards stepped back. The judge cleared his throat nervously. Lord Vereen, that will be enough, he said. But Daniel was already speaking. You hurt my child, he said quietly. And now you're angry because your lies are falling apart. Vereen opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His knees weakened. He looked around for support, but the audience that once admired him now glared with disgust. Daniel slowly walked toward the center of the room, placing himself directly between Vereen and Ember. His voice was calm, but the entire court stopped moving to hear him. This trial is over, Daniel said. You punished a child for being afraid. You tortured them for not speaking. You terrified them into silence. And you called it tradition. Silence fell again, heavier this time. Many creatures lowered their heads in shame. Daniel continued. My child survived weeks of fear, pain, and loneliness. But Ember did not break. They spoke. They reached for someone they trusted. That alone proves more strength than any of you have shown. The judge slowly nodded in agreement. His voice shook as he addressed the guards. Release the dragon, now. The guards hesitated just a moment, not out of doubt, but out of fear of what Vereen would do. But Vereen no longer held authority over them. His whip lay forgotten on the floor, and his reputation had collapsed with it. The guards unlocked Ember's chains. Metal clanged as the heavy restraints fell to the ground. Ember's wings unfolded slightly, as if tasting freedom for the first time in weeks. Their tail shook nervously, unsure if this was real. Daniel knelt in front of them and opened his arms. Ember moved forward, slow at first, then faster, until they pressed their head into his chest. Daniel wrapped his arms around them, holding them tightly, whispering soft comforts only Ember could hear. The crowd watched with wide eyes. Some cried openly. Some bowed their heads. Some felt shame for never questioning Varen's methods before. But one thing was clear. No one dared to interrupt the moment. When Daniel finally stood again, Ember stayed close beside him. The judge addressed him formally. Human Daniel, he said, your words, your evidence, and your child's courage have revealed the truth. This court apologizes for the suffering you both faced. You may leave freely with Ember and Lord Vereen. The judge's voice hardened. He will face investigation and punishment. Varen's mouth hung open, but no protest came out. The fear in him had grown too strong. He sank to his knees, realizing his power had slipped away forever. Daniel nodded once. Not in victory, he did not care about winning. He only cared that Ember was safe. He turned to the crowd. "Let this be a lesson," he said softly. "Fear does not teach. Pain does not guide. Only kindness can grow trust." Many creatures bowed their heads, accepting his words. Daniel placed a gentle hand on Ember's back. "Let's go home," he whispered. Ember made a soft sound and followed him. Step by step, they walked toward the large court doors. No one stopped them. No one spoke. The court watched in silence, a silence created not by fear, but by respect. And for the first time since Ember's capture, the path ahead looked bright. The great court doors closed behind Daniel and Ember with a deep echo, but neither of them looked back. Inside, the judge was giving orders. Guards were surrounding Lord Varine, and voices were rising in confusion and anger. But all of that belonged to the past now. Daniel cared only about the trembling young dragon walking beside him. Trying to understand that they were finally free, the hallway outside the courtroom was wide and quiet, with tall windows that let in golden light. Ember blinked at the brightness, unused to anything that wasn't cold stone or dark cages. Their wings fluttered softly as if testing the warm air. They moved slowly at first, unsure if someone would shout at them, chase them, or grab them like before. But Daniel's steady steps and calm breathing guided them forward. "You're safe," Daniel whispered, touching Ember's neck gently. "You don't need to rush. We can take this one step at a time." Ember pressed their forehead to his shoulder, a small gesture that meant more than words. Their tail curled around his leg, not from fear now, but from comfort. For the first time in weeks, they were not being ordered around. They were simply free to exist. Outside the building, the courtyard was filled with onlookers who had heard the whispers from inside. Some bowed as Daniel passed, ashamed of not seeing the truth sooner. Others watched Ember with wide, gentle eyes. But no one approached. They felt the quiet wall of protection Daniel carried around him, like a shield that needed no weapon. Ember lifted their head and looked at the open sky. A soft breeze brushed their scales. They shivered, not from fear, but from a feeling they barely remembered, hope. Daniel followed their gaze. "You want to try flying?" he asked softly. Ember looked up, then back at him, unsure. The memories of failed flight trials, harsh commands, and painful hits were still fresh. Their wings twitched but folded back quickly. Ember lowered their head again. Daniel knelt beside them. "Hey," he whispered. "We don't have to do anything today. Not flying. Not talking. Not anything. We just walk together. That's enough." Ember looked at him with such deep trust that Daniel felt his heart tighten. This child had survived things no child should ever face. The fact that Ember still felt safe with him was proof of their strength, not weakness. They walked toward the transport platform where Daniel's small ship was waiting. Ember hesitated before stepping inside. The last journey they took had ended in fear. But Daniel put a hand on the ship's door and looked into Ember's eyes. "This time," he said gently, "you're going home. With me." Ember climbed aboard slowly, their wings brushing the doorway. When Daniel followed, the ship's soft lights turned on, making the interior warm and welcoming. Ember curled their tail around their body and lay down near Daniel's seat. Their eyes were half open, tired from everything that had happened. Daniel sat beside them on the floor instead of taking the pilot's chair. He rested one hand on their back, rubbing gentle circles like he had always done when Ember struggled to sleep as a baby dragon. "You did so well today," he whispered. "You were brave. You spoke. You stood strong." Ember let out a small, shaky breath. Not a word, not yet, but a sound full of relief. Daniel leaned back against the wall. "You don't need to be afraid anymore. I'm not letting anyone hurt you again. Ever." Ember closed their eyes and slowly relaxed. Their shaking stopped. Their breathing steadied. Their wings unfolded slightly, resting against the soft floor. It was the calmest they had been since being taken. Outside, the engine hummed as the ship prepared to lift off. The sky was bright blue with streaks of white clouds drifting gently. As the ship rose, Ember opened their eyes just a little and looked toward the window. The world no longer seemed cold. It looked open, wide, full of possibilities. Daniel smiled softly. "Whenever you're ready to fly again," he whispered, "I'll be right here. Beside you. Not behind you with a whip. Beside you, always."